All right, we're going to continue exploring Chapter 8, which is titled Computer Reliability. And in this lecture, we are actually going to explore Section 8.6 and Section 8.7. All right, Section 8.6 is titled Tesla version 7.0 Autopilot. So in October of 2014, Tesla began selling sedans with a $4,250 technology package containing a dozen ultrasonic sensors, a camera, a front radar, and a digitally controlled brakes. The package allowed the car to stop before crashing. A year later, Tesla released a software update named Tesla version 7.0 to the 60,000 cars it had sold with the technology package. The new software enabled the car to control its speed and steer. So Tesla gave this update the nickname Autopilot. Tesla wrote this on its webpage, quote, "While truly driverless cars are still a few years away, Tesla Autopilot functions like the systems that airplane pilots use when conditions are clear. The driver is still responsible for and ultimately in control of the car," end quote. With the launch of Tesla version 7.0, Tesla Motors became the first automaker to release a product exhibiting level 3 automation as defined by SAE International. So there are 5 SAE International levels that are defined, but the level 3 is titled conditional automation and defined as the driving mode specific performance by an automated driving system of all aspects of the dynamic driving task, with the exception that the human driver will respond appropriately to a request to intervene. All right, enter the true story of Joshua Brown, who was a 40-year-old Tesla fanatic. He nicknamed his Model S sedan Tessie, and he averaged more than 5,000 miles per month on the road. Mr. Brown posted YouTube videos showing himself driving, quote unquote, hands-free and testing the limits of the system. He enjoyed driving fast and received 8 speeding tickets over a 6-year period, the most recent being a ticket in October of 2015 for driving 64 miles per hour in a 35 mile per hour zone. So at 4:36 p.m. on May 7th of 2016, Brown was killed when his car crashed into the semi-trailer portion of a semi-trailer truck on a Florida highway. The NTSB investigation also determined that Autopilot was engaged for 37 minutes before the collision, and during this time, Brown's hands were on the steering wheel for only 25 seconds. He received 7 visual warnings to put his hands back on the steering wheel. On 6 of these occasions, the visual warning was followed by an audible chime. Brown responded to each of these chimes by putting his hands on the steering wheel for between 1 and 3 seconds. But neither Autopilot nor Brown applied the brakes before the crash that killed him. So the question is, why didn't the automatic emergency braking system, or the AEB system, of Tesla version 7.0 activate when the semi-trailer truck turned in front of the Tesla and Brown failed to respond? Well, according to Tesla, automatic braking did not engage because the trailer was white, making it difficult to see, and the trailer was tall, making its radar signature similar to the radar signature of an overhead sign. Several months before the fatal Tesla accident, Ken Washington, who was the vice president of research and advanced engineering at Ford Motor Company, said Ford was skipping over SAE Level 3 automation because of its inherent difficulties, namely, how can the computer ensure that the driver is paying enough attention that it can pass over control in case of an emergency. Drivers who are not needed 99.9% of the time are likely to get bored. And Audi reported test results indicating it takes an average of 3 to 7 seconds, but sometimes as many as 10 seconds, for a driver to regain attention and take control of a vehicle in an emergency. So in many emergency situations, there may not be 7 to 10 seconds for the driver to retake control of the vehicle before an accident occurs. And this is called the hands-off problem. And Volvo and Google have joined Ford in deciding to skip over SAE Level 3 automation and develop self-driving cars that never expect humans to take over in an emergency situation. All right, so we can now explore the moral question of where should we assign moral responsibility, and to what degree perhaps in the case of the death of Joshua Brown, since it seems like it was preventable. So how then should moral responsibility for his death be allocated among the truck driver, the engineers and managers of Tesla Motors, and Brown himself? Well, let's begin by considering the truck driver of the semi-trailer truck. So this driver he turned his rig left into the path of Brown's car, forcing the car to slow down or turn if it were to avoid an accident. The truck driver told the Florida Highway Patrol that he did not see the Tesla, but an eyewitness traveling behind the semi-trailer truck saw the Tesla coming and told the Florida Highway Patrol that the truck driver should have seen the Tesla before he began turning in front of the car. So in general, the driver of a vehicle that turns left in front of another vehicle going straight is at fault. And in fact, the truck driver involved in the accident was cited for a right-of-way violation. At the same time, however, Brown's car was exceeding the speed limit, and when the vehicle going straight is speeding, some or all of the fault typically shifts to the driver of the speeding car. So we can maybe exonerate the truck driver to some degree or entirely, depending on the specifics of how fast Brown was speeding. But how much of the responsibility for the accident should be assigned to Joshua Brown? That is the next question. And at the time of the accident, Brown was flouting both traffic laws and Tesla Motors instructions for the use of its product. He set the cruise control to 74 miles per hour, which was 9 miles per hour above the speed limit, and he did not keep his hands on the steering wheel while autopilot was engaged. And the fact that he did not apply the brakes before the collision, even though the truck was in view for about 7 seconds, is evidence he was not keeping his eyes on the road ahead. All right, well, should the engineers and managers at Tesla Motors be held morally responsible for the accident that killed Joshua Brown to some extent? Well, for them to be morally responsible, their actions or inactions must have caused the harm, and these actions must have been the result of carelessness, recklessness, and negligence. And there are two necessary conditions for assigning moral responsibility, right? The causal condition and the mental condition. So in terms of the causal condition, they did contribute to the harm by producing an automobile equipped with an automatic emergency braking system that failed to stop the car before it collided with a large truck crossing in front of it. And in terms of the mental condition, they demonstrated carelessness, recklessness, or negligence in at least 3 ways. First, they could have reduced the risk to drivers using the beta version of the autopilot system by restricting its use to freeways where there is no lateral crossing traffic, but they chose not to do so. Second, they decided to allow the driver to set an autopilot cruising speed well over the speed limit, further stressing the capabilities of the computerized system. And third, and most significantly, they decided to release a product with SAE Level 3 automation without solving the handoff problem, which was a known problem. So Tesla version 7.0 did not even require drivers to demonstrate a minimal level of attention by keeping their hands on the steering wheel. Tesla engineers designed the autopilot system so that it would continue to function even after issuing a series of warnings to the driver to put their hands back on the steering wheel. So Tesla Motors implicitly acknowledged this problem by changing the way the system worked after this fatal crash. So in conclusion, moral responsibility in terms of the causal condition and the mental condition for the accident that killed Joshua Brown must be shared, though not necessarily equally, among the truck driver, the engineers and managers at Tesla Motors, and Joshua Brown himself. The truck driver clearly failed to yield the right-of-way to Joshua Brown's Tesla, but Joshua Brown was speeding and he did not keep his hands on the steering wheel, and he failed to remain attentive to the road ahead. But in addition, Tesla Motors released to its customers an automatic emergency braking system that failed to spot a large semi-trailer truck crossing the path of Brown's Tesla. So the decision was made to release a product with SAE Level 3 automation, despite the fact that the development team had not solved the known handoff problem. All right, section 8.7 is titled Uber Test Vehicle Accident. So Travis Kalanick, who's the co-founder and former CEO of the ride-sharing company Uber, saw the development of autonomous vehicles as a threat to Uber's very existence. He felt that if Uber were not among the first companies to develop the technology of autonomous vehicles, then Uber would be put out of business by another ride-sharing enterprise that could undercut Uber's prices by eliminating the cost of drivers. So Uber moved quickly in an effort to catch up with other companies like Tesla and Waymo that had a big lead developing autonomous vehicles. In January of 2015, it opened the Uber Advanced Technology Center in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and hired 50 autonomous vehicle researchers from nearby Carnegie Mellon University. 20 months later, Uber started offering self-driving car pickups to customers in Pittsburgh. And it's important to keep in mind that the cars were self-driving rather than fully autonomous. So Uber engineers, in other words, were still in the front seat to monitor the system and take over when necessary. On December 14, 2016, in defiance of California regulators, Uber publicly launched a similar service in San Francisco. But Uber's San Francisco experiment lasted only 1 week because a taxi driver caught on video a self-driving Uber running a red light in front of the Museum of Modern Art, which generated a lot of negative media attention. And the California Department of Motor Vehicles revoked the registrations of Uber's self-driving cars, and Uber then moved its test fleet to Arizona. But Arizona Governor Doug Ducey sent a tweet welcoming Uber to his state. Quote, "While California put the brakes on innovation and change with more bureaucracy and regulation, Arizona is paving the way for new technology and new businesses," end quote. When Uber began its testing of self-driving vehicles, it put 2 safety operators in the car, one behind the wheel and the other one in the front passenger seat. The first operator was responsible for taking over control of the vehicle from the computer system if necessary, and the second operator was responsible for monitoring the performance of the system and logging significant events on a laptop computer. Uber assigned its safety operators 8-hour shifts with a 30-minute lunch break in the middle. Operators rode in self-driving self-driving cars that repeatedly traversed the same route. In the fall of 2017, Uber decided to remove the second safety operator, but some operators told their managers they were concerned that removing the second operator would make it more difficult for them to stay alert. And the operators, it turns out, had a legitimate concern, given the research going back for several decades that has demonstrated that humans get bored when they are required to oversee highly automated systems that require relatively few interactions. Jobs that have been studied include train engineers, commercial airline pilots, drone operators, and surgical room anesthesiologists. Uber itself fired one safety operator after the operator fell asleep at the wheel and was reported by another operator. The reliability of Uber's self-driving system in March of 2018 was far lower than that of more mature systems, such as Waymo. So whereas Waymo reported its cars traveled an average of 5,600 miles per intervention by a human safety operator, Uber's system was not yet consistently hitting the goal of averaging even 13 miles per human intervention. And another problematic issue for Uber was that every 2 miles on average, its self-driving vehicles would startle passengers with a bad experience, such as braking too quickly. It is difficult to build a self-driving or autonomous car that can correctly avoid colliding with genuine obstacles, such as other cars in concrete mediums, while at the same time ignoring other things detected by its sensors, such as car exhaust, steam, and litter. But incorrectly identifying a danger when in fact there is none is called a false positive or a false alarm in more common parlance. False positives, though, are bad news. Not only is slamming on the brakes disconcerting to passengers, it is dangerous. A car that brakes more quickly than expected is liable to get rear-ended. In fact, getting rear-ended by a human driver is the most common type of accident for self-driving or autonomous cars. Engineers can modify a system to eliminate nearly all false positives, but that action risks making the system prone to false negatives, which involves failing to identify a dangerous situation when in fact there is one. And a great deal of testing is required to find the best middle ground. The new CEO of Uber was supposed to visit Arizona in April of 2018, and management wanted to give him a confidence-building, glitch-free ride. The decision was made to reduce the so-called bad experiences for passengers by turning off the emergency braking feature of the self-driving cars and giving responsibility for emergency braking and steering to the human safety operator. The engineers did not, however, implement a way for the self-driving system to alert the driver when emergency braking was needed. The Volvo XC90s in Uber's Arizona test fleet came equipped with an automatic emergency braking system as standard equipment, but that system was deactivated whenever the car was under the control of the self-driving computer system to avoid a situation where two active systems would give conflicting commands to the vehicle. So at 9:14 p.m. on the evening of March 18th, 2018, an Uber test vehicle left the Uber garage in Tempe, Arizona, and began running a predetermined test route with a vehicle operator in the driver's seat. At 9:58 p.m., the vehicle was in its second traversal of the test route when it crossed the Salt River, heading north in the rightmost lane of Mill Avenue at 43 miles per hour, 2 miles per hour below the speed limit. At this point, the computer had been driving the car for 19 minutes without any intervention from the operator. About 600 feet ahead of the Uber, a 49-year-old female pedestrian wearing dark clothes stepped off the curb on the west side of Mill Avenue and began walking east across the street, pushing a bicycle. Mill Avenue was wide at the point she chose to cross, with 2 left turn lanes, 2 through lanes, and a bike lane. At the place the woman began walking across the street, there was no crosswalk. 4 signs in the vicinity warned pedestrians not to cross and directed them to use a crosswalk, but the nearest crosswalk was located about 360 feet to the north. About 6 seconds before impact, the vehicle sensors detected an object ahead, but at first the self-driving system could not classify the object. It then classified the object as another vehicle before finally determining the object was a bicycle. For each of these classifications, the system made predictions about the path the object would follow. When the car was about 80 feet from the pedestrian 1.3 seconds before impact, the self-driving system determined that emergency braking would be required in order to prevent a collision, but the self-driving system depended upon the human operator to perform the emergency braking, and it did not alert the operator because there was no alert mechanism. The safety operator had not been keeping her gaze fixed on the road ahead. Instead, she had been looking down frequently. She told the police she had been looking at the computer interface for several seconds and was surprised to see the pedestrian when she looked up. However, according to the police report, Hulu had streamed the talent show The Voice to the driver's smartphone that evening. The streaming lasted for 42 minutes and stopped at 9:59 p.m., the approximate time of the collision. Less than a second before impact, the operator put her hands on the steering wheel and began turning the vehicle to the right. Traveling at 39 miles per hour, the vehicle hit the pedestrian. Less than a second after the collision, the operator began braking the car, and the pedestrian died as a result of being hit by the Volvo. Video cameras, or videos from cameras inside the Uber, reveal that the pedestrian did not look in the direction of the oncoming car until just before it hit her. If the pedestrian had looked for oncoming vehicles before stepping off the curb, the headlights of the Volvo might not have been visible to her because of a slight curve in the road and trees planted near the west side of the roadway. So perhaps she concluded there was no traffic at 10 p.m. and did not see a reason to look again. Perhaps her judgment was impaired, in fact, because toxicology tests performed by the medical examiner after the accident returned positive results for methamphetamine and marijuana. A few days after the fatality, and just a few weeks after authorizing self-driving car developers to test vehicles with no human safety operators at the wheel, Governor Ducey put the brakes on Uber's testing program in Arizona. He said the safety of the public should have been Uber's top priority, and the March 18 incident was, quote, an unquestionable failure to comply with this expectation, end quote. On May 23rd of 2018, Uber announced it was shutting down its test facility in Arizona and terminated its 300 employees working there as safety operators.